Good afternoon and welcome to another Turnstile Tours virtual program. I'm Stephan D.W. coming to you from Flushing, Queens, pretty far away as waterfronts go from where we're going today. My colleague Andrew will be out on, in fact, is already out on the ferry, one of the most popular ferries in the NYC Ferry network to Far Rockaway, the ferry to the beach. And we'll be talking about the sights you can see from that ferry, starting from the Brooklyn Army Terminal. We've, in other programs, gone at least that far and looked pretty closely at those waterfronts. So we're excited to see waterfront we haven't looked at so much today. We'll get Andrew on in just a moment here. And we'll talk about what we're passing, including, we just saw a map there for a moment ago that refers to a project that didn't come to fruition, which Andrew will be passing over in just a moment. Looks like we're at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. Hello, Andrew.
Hey, Stephan, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. So we just pulled into the first stop of the ferry route. For those of you who aren't familiar with this ferry route, it starts in Lower Manhattan at Pier 11, comes to the Brooklyn Army Terminal, just coming up over my shoulder, and then goes straight to Rockaway Beach. If we have any folks from Queens, I just want to make sure we're not going to quite go to Far Rockaway, but we will go to Rockaway Beach. Yeah, so we're going to be, unlike our other ferry virtual tours, we won't be making a bunch of stops. We're going to go straight there. We'll disembark from the ferry and we'll walk down to the beach for the last portion of the program. But the Brooklyn Army Terminal is a place we know well and explore in many different ways, both in person and online. So we won't dwell on it too much, but you can join our program on September 22nd, where we're going to talk about Elvis Presley and the Army Terminal. But we're going to turn south in just a second and take a look at the shoreline here of Brooklyn and talk a little bit about Staten Island as well. So I'm going to flip my camera around, and so we can see the rise in trees of Owl's Head Park, and that's going to be one of the first subjects that we're going to talk about on the program today. How's that view, Stephan?
That view is pretty good and a sight for sore eyes. It's been too long since I've been down there. We can see the big apartment buildings that stand right on top of the railroad tracks that loop around through Brooklyn and Queens over to the Hellgate from the float bridges, which we've talked about in other programs, where barges bring trains into Long Island. Right dead in front of you. And there to the right, there's a crane that's doing some work of the Owl's Head wastewater treatment plant. And that mound of green trees there is Owl's Head Park, Pride of Bay Ridge.
Yeah, formerly the estate of E.W. Bliss, who was a machine tool manufacturer and torpedo manufacturer in Brooklyn. He had a large factory just north of the Brooklyn Army Terminal, as well as on Plymouth Street in Dumbo. But after he died, he bequeathed his estate to the city of New York, and it became Owl's Head Park. But as you were mentioning before, this area was meant to be home to an important piece of infrastructure. We'll get to the Verrazzano Bridge in just a couple of minutes, but there was supposed to be other infrastructure built in this area, right, Stephan?
That's right. The first couple decades of the 20th century, there was a big effort to connect Staten Island and Brooklyn by rail. And of course, Staten Island is connected to New Jersey by rail. So this is really connecting Long Island to the rest of the country on the other side of the Hudson, on the other side of the harbor by rail. They got as far as digging tunnel. They got about 150 feet into the harbor with this tunnel, which I'll show you the plans for it here. At that point, my understanding is the B&O Railroad was a partner on it. It was supposed to be a subway and freight tunnel with the rail section here, the North Shore Railroad. This is the Staten Island Ferry Terminal connecting to New Jersey. And when the B&O Railroad pulled out, Mayor Highland pulled out and sculled that program. But a lot of Staten Islanders and a lot of Brooklynites and people from all over the city would love to see that revived. And
the B&O Railroad, they operate a railroad along the North Shore of Staten Island, right?
That's correct. Yeah, the freight, and they also had passenger service The last one of the last passenger trains on that line brought the Queen of England in sort of the back door into New York City. And we did a great program on that connection with one of our frequent viewers, Don Sheets, who, sorry, Don Lotz, rather, who
Don Lotz, yeah. And we talked about a lift bridge, which we're going to see one later on as we head into Jamaica Bay. But maybe we can pull up my screen here and we can take a look at the community of Bay Ridge here. And there you can see that tower right there. That is Fort Hamilton High School.
Yep, formerly the site of the Crescent Athletic Club. They were out there from the 1890s into about 1939 when they went bankrupt. They expanded to Long Island at just the wrong moment. 1939 was when they went bankrupt. 1929, they bought the Long Island property. Before that, this whole area was still referred to by Bay Ridgers as the Gold Coast and has some fancy houses on it, but it had a lot of large estates, including Judge Van Brunt's property was where the high school is now. And that was part of what was purchased by the Crescent Athletic Club. They merged with the Nereid Boat Club, and this was their boathouse down there. They had quite a few boats down there. The second one, they had a problem with fires breaking out, but one of the many boat clubs, part of New York City's long obsession with rowing and the sport of on the water there.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Gold Coast. It had originally had a similar name, which was Yellow Hook, but that name was changed in 1853 due to the fact that they did not want the community to be associated with yellow fever, which was a common problem. And a little bit later on, we'll take a closer look and talk a little bit about the history of quarantine in this section of the harbor when some islands are going to come into view in just a second. But we're passing by now, right underneath the Verrazzano Bridge right here is Fort Hamilton. So Fort Hamilton is the last active military base here in New York City. It's still an active Army base, and it used to have another little annex to it, which was called Fort Lafayette. Was just a little coastal defense fort on an island just offshore, and it stood there until the early 1960s when they started building the Verrazzano Bridge right here. And so there you can see the edge of that round fort. It looks very similar to Castle Williams on Governor's Island. And so this is part of the coastal defense system that spanned across the Narrows right here. So Fort Hamilton and Fort Lafayette on one side, and a whole complex, which we'll see in a second, on the other side called Fort Wadsworth. And so you can maybe make out Battery Weed. And so today, this is part of the National Park Service, but it also is, there's still Army Reserve. And then just a little bit north of it, in Rosebank, we have the Coast Guard station that's there as well. So there's Battery Weed right there, Fort Wadsworth. And then here you can see that the complex of Fort Wadsworth there, all these different batteries built over a series of different kind of evolutions in technology required new coastal defense batteries to be constructed. We can actually make out these islands out here. Can you see those, Stefan?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is Hoffman Island on the right and Swinburne Island on the left. So the story of quarantine, has a lot to do with immigration. So as ships were coming in, bringing in immigrants, communities didn't really want to take in people who were determined to be sick. And so there were quarantine hospitals built on Staten Island in 1857 and 1858, which Staten Islanders promptly burned down. Then they had some hospital ships that were going around the harbor, but no one really wanted them docked nearby. And so the city decided to build two islands. So these are actually built from dredging. Hoffman and Swinburne used to be about the same size, about 2.5 acres, built in 1870 and 1873. And now Hoffman is much bigger. It was expanded in 1896 to be about 10 acres, but this was the quarantine. So they would if you were on a ship and you were uh, you know um, sick with cholera or yellow fever, they would take you out here and until you got better or you didn't get better. And so these islands actually,
the chart to give
yeah,
people
yeah,
a perspective on this and where it is in
great.
the harbor. And we should mention that over by that Coast Guard station on Staten Island is the Alice Austin House, and Alice Austin was
Yes.
brought in to take photos at the quarantine station. So it's a great early female photographer and just a really fascinating person to learn about. And her house is gorgeous and a great active museum right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the quarantine station on Staten Island in Rosebank, that was where the inspectors were based. So they would come out to the ships, but they didn't necessarily take in patients there. They were brought out to these islands until the 1920s. There were various schemes over the years to turn them, to sell them to private developers. Robert Moses in the 50s actually wanted to fill in this little channel between them and build a 250-acre amusement park here. That obviously didn't happen. But their most recent active use was during World War II, when there was a training station for the Merchant Marine, and then there was also a degaussing station, which was where you'd basically demagnetize ships so that they wouldn't attract magnetic mines as well. But yeah, here you can see all the buildings of the quarantine hospital. They really kind of fell out of use because of the reduction in immigration after the Immigration Act of 1924.
I understand now it's
yeah.
mostly inhabited by seals.
Yes, yeah, great place to see seals, and there are people that do seal watches out there. And speaking of wildlife, we are now in the lower New York Bay. This is the first time on these tours that we've gone into the lower New York Bay, past the Narrows, past the Verrazzano Bridge, and it's we're not quite in the open ocean, but it's a beautiful spot out here.
Are you starting to feel some swells?
Yeah, a little bit for sure.
Of course,
but it's a pretty calm day today.
Yeah, we do have to mention as we're looking at these waters, these were the waters were a heart of the oystering industry in New York City, particularly the oystermen that we associate with the African American community Sandy Ground on Staten Island. The lower bay was where a lot of them did their oystering.
So I'm just coming back to the other side here so we can get a look back at Brooklyn.
Is that Gravesend Bay that we're looking at there?
Yeah, yep. So we're looking at Gravesend Bay right now.
Right.
And we're about to come past Seagate in Coney Island.
Yeah, it's one of the gated communities, not only gated, but surrounded by, it's walled off from the rest of Coney Island with a 12-foot fence topped in barbed wire. And we can see the lighthouse there at the end, sticking out tall and white from the background now. It's in front of the sky. That lighthouse, 1890, was when it was built using the plans from the Throgs Neck Lighthouse. And its last keeper was the last civilian lighthouse keeper. He started in 1960. They automated the light in, I believe, the 1980s, but he stayed on and worked until as keeper unofficially until 2003. So the last civilian lighthouse keeper in America.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Yeah, we're starting to see the beach now, and Gravesend Bay. I mean, you want to share a little bit about the community of Gravesend?
Yeah, Gravesend,
really interesting spot in Brooklyn.
Right, this, like so much of our waterfront, used to be a lot of salt marshes, and this, of course, is where the British Navy landed in the Battle of Long Island, the Battle of Brooklyn. This is where they came over from Staten Island, and the town of Gravesend. We'll see that on a little Google map here in a second. That was founded by a woman named Lady Deborah Moody, and you can see that there's a square in the upper right-hand corner on that map that Cindy will point out to us in just a second, but really clear square in the grid. There it is. And that marks the walls of the village of Gravesend. Lady Moody was about 30 years younger than Shakespeare. She married a baronet. She came from a pretty wealthy family, but she was an Anabaptist, and so came to America looking for religious freedom. Went to Swampscott, Massachusetts, which was not the place to find it because the Puritans kicked her out pretty quickly. So she came here to found a community of religious freedom and was a major player in New Netherlands and early New York politics.
And of course, there's a one of the oldest churches in Brooklyn is down on down in Gravesend. And speaking of the Battle of Brooklyn, we also we have I think it's the oldest continually standing Liberty pole from Evacuation Day back in 1783. So it's not the exact same pole, but they built the flagpole there continuously since 1783. So if you're ever down in that neck of the woods, check it out in front of the church. Yeah, so now we're coming by the beach here. And can you still hear me okay, Stefan?
Yeah, there's a little bit of wind out there, but that's
the wind's picked up quite a bit.
And
but yeah, so
Coney Island proper, the Coney Island we all know and love and think of here with the parachute drop. Yeah,
so we're going to see the amusements, and obviously there's so much to talk about in Coney Island that we're going to be past it in a hot minute. Yeah, I wanted to just point out a couple of the major landmarks that we can actually see quite well from the water. And obviously the most prominent is the parachute jump, which was actually built for the World's Fair in 1939. And interestingly, it was a sponsored attraction, actually sponsored by Lifesavers. So you can see the sign on it.
When you say it was built for the World's Fair, it was built in Corona Park, is what you're saying.
That's right. That's right. And then it was moved after the fair down here to Brooklyn. And renovated actually in recent years, where they put a set of LED lights on it so they can light it up in all sorts of different colors. So even though it's no longer active as an actual ride, you can actually, you were lowered off the top by parachutes. You can see it lit up. And we can just see the ballpark for the Coney Island Cyclones, for the Brooklyn Cyclones, excuse me, right behind it. So yeah, definitely a major landmark of Coney Island. Another major landmark, which might be hard to make out with the buildings behind it, but that is the Wonder Wheel, or Dino's Wonder Wheel, built in 1920, and just one of my favorite stories of Coney Island. So built as for an amusement operator in the area. And for years, Dino's Verderis was he was a street vendor, and he operated restaurants and concessions in the area. And it was here at Coney Island that he met his wife, Lula, and he promised her that someday he would buy her the Wonder Wheel, and it would be the biggest wedding ring anyone ever got. And in 1980, he fulfilled that promise and bought it for $250,000, and the family has operated it ever since.
I can't hear anything you're saying, but
okay, so I'm going to go ahead and join and share the story of, since we're talking about the Wonder Wheel. These are our friends Alex Mann and Stuart Wieger, and they were married in 2001 on the Wonder Wheel. He came from a religious Jewish family, and rather than her walking around him 7 times in the ceremony, they decided to ride the Wonder Wheel 7 times together, and then they signed their ketubah, their marriage certificate, in the like the control room of the Wonder Wheel, and they ended up having their reception at the New York Aquarium, and they also had hot dogs from Nathan's, and I think they spent in total like $500 on their catering. I think it's the way to go, but one of my favorite wedding stories.
Absolutely, nothing like a Wonder Wheel car as your chuppah. That's fantastic.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, great. The wind is really picked up here, so it's but yeah, so you can see it now. We did, as you mentioned, we just passed the New York Aquarium. Which was relocated down here. If you joined our program earlier this year about Battery Park, you know that the aquarium was originally in Battery Park. This is what it used to look like inside the Castle Garden. And just a couple of years ago, they opened a wonderful exhibit called Ocean Wonders, about the local marine ecosystem with a special focus on sharks. And they also have some cool reconstructed shipwreck habitats here. So they have this map of of local shipwrecks. So really, really cool exhibit if you haven't checked it out. I think it opened in 2017, I believe.
Or 2018.
2018. Okay. Yeah, and it's part of the Wildlife Conservation Society.
Yeah, they which we've talked about them. They're also the folks with Prospect Park Zoo, and a lot of that exhibit focuses on the Hudson Canyon, which is a remarkable piece of underwater geology, and almost the size of the Grand Canyon, cutting into the continental shelf just off of the waters that we're looking at here. And with the upwelling and the currents running up and down the canyon, it's a place of great biodiversity. And really one of those aspects of the waterfront where it's incredibly important and fascinating, but because we can't see it, it's hard to appreciate. The Kingsborough Community College coming up there on the right. You can see their sort of decorative lighthouse structure there.
Yeah, so we have the Kingsborough Community College, and maybe we can pull up some pictures that we have from this area in World War II. If you know the book Manhattan Beach, the title of the book comes from the neighborhood where one of the characters lived, but this was also a major center for World War II. There you can see the Merchant Marine Training Center.
And we should mention that Manhattan Beach is the neighborhood just outside of Kingsborough Community College. So
correct.
Yeah.
But yeah, so directly in Manhattan Beach was the Coast Guard Training Center. And then this is the Merchant Marine Training Center, which was built in 1938. If we go to the next picture, this is where so many ordinary seamen on merchant ships in World War II were trained. Now, on the other side of Long Island, up in Kings Point, is where officers were trained, also established during World War II. But this is where lots of ordinary sailors, including Woody Guthrie, who was a merchant mariner, was trained there. And then, like I mentioned, next door was the Coast Guard. A couple notable people who were stationed at this Coast Guard Training Center included Jack Dempsey, who taught Coast Guardsmen in hand-to-hand combat, the famous boxer. And here we can see a couple of the spars. This was the women's auxiliary of the Coast Guard. And yesterday was the Coast Guard's birthday. So I wanted to mention that for sure. And then later the land, when the military didn't need it anymore, was turned over to the city to build Coast Guard Community College. So I'm going to come to the other side right here, and we'll take a look at Breezy Point.
Yeah, so Breezy Point now separating you from the open Atlantic as we're going into Jamaica Bay. And Breezy Point also, we've got, Breezy Point is got also a gated community, just like Seagate, which was devastated by Hurricane Sandy. The fires out there were tremendous. I see we have a question from Benjamin, so maybe we can drop that into the chat, and we'll get that from you.
Yeah. So folks know where we are. We're on the Rockaway Peninsula, and famously, this image in 1993, right at the end of Breezy Point, there was a ship that ran aground, and on board were nearly 300 people brought from China trying to be smuggled into the United States. And the ship ran aground, and all those people had to be rescued. Most of them came from the Fujian region of China. But a really memorable day in Breezy Point's recent history when that ship ran aground and those people were rescued. There's a great book about the story of the Golden Venture called The Snakehead, which is worth reading. But yeah, so this all in front of us is the Rockaway Peninsula. But why don't we take a little look at Jamaica Bay?
Absolutely. So we'll get the overhead. Here's our nautical chart of Jamaica Bay. And you can see most of Jamaica Bay is made up of salt marshes, all those green areas with a couple of prominent islands in the midst of it. And all around the edge, you see these channels going into the shoreline. Again, those were also salt marshes at one time, and that land has been filled in. At the upper left, you see Canarsie, sort of the the peninsula that's almost completely round and set in is Mill Basin. Mill Basin because there was a tide mill there at one time, as there was over at Marine Park. And this was all this we almost didn't get this. If others had had their druthers, this might have looked a lot more like Newark Bay does today. There was a plan in the late 19th, early 20th century to make this the center of New York City shipping, bringing in rail, dredging, building piers. And this is one case in which arguably Robert Moses did us a favor. It's hard to say what would have been if Robert Moses hadn't stepped in, opposed that, and in favor of the parks and his parkways. So while on the one hand, Jamaica Bay is surrounded by highways, but on the other hand, it is not what Newark Bay is today.
And we have a new park on Jamaica Bay as well, which is Shirley Chisholm State Park.
Yeah, that's a fantastic park right off of one of the parkways.
Yeah, why don't we take a look at that map again? Sorry.
Sure.
Which I think it's so neat to see, all of the ways in which, we think of so much of this geology as fixed, as these peninsulas as fixed, but really, if we could pull up that map, really it's so fleeting. You can see over here on the left Manhattan Beach how small and thin that peninsula is. Now it's, Sheepshead Bay is like a concrete basin basically on the other side of it. And if you look at the Rockaway Peninsula, again, really so much of what we think of as solid ground, this is all filled in over the last century, and it's really, that solid ground is really quite illusory.
That's so important to remember, especially with rising sea levels. When they dug Ambrose Channel to facilitate movement of ships into New York Harbor, it changed the way the water flowed in around the Narrows and around Coney Island, and we nearly lost the lighthouse at Coney Island because the soil got worn away so quickly.
Oh, wow. So here we're coming up. We should mention this bridge. So this bridge is connecting the Rockaway Peninsula, and behind me this is Flatbush Avenue. So this is the end of Flatbush Avenue right here. And behind me is Floyd Bennett Field, which was the first municipal airport in New York City. But this bridge here is called the Gill Hodges Memorial Bridge. And I wanted to give a shout out to Gill Hodges, the Brooklyn Dodger great and a Mets manager. Hodges played for the Dodgers in 1955. I think we have a picture of the 1955 Dodgers, the only Dodgers team to win the World Series. So he was the teammate number 14 right there. He's the first baseman. And then after he retired from playing, he became the manager of the Mets and managed them to the 1969 World Series, the Miracle Mets. And so when he died in 1972, it was really a shock. He was only 47 years old. He died of a heart attack at spring training. And so I think the city was really looking for a way to, memorialize this great person. And so they chose this bridge right here and renamed it in his honor. And I think it's great because Gill Hodges is someone who kind of spans Brooklyn and Queens, in that he played for the Dodgers and then played for the Mets and managed the Mets. And so this is a bridge that connects Brooklyn on the right and Queens on the left. So I love that story.
Kenneth Fury points out there was 8 cents for the Daily News back then.
Yeah. Here we can see Jacob Reese Park is right in front of us. So one of the most popular spots of the beach along the Rockaway Peninsula, but much of the peninsula is beachfront. You can go and swim wherever you want, which is what I'm going to do after this tour, is take a little dip down at about 108th Street.
We should point out for those who don't know Jacob Reese Park that what we're referring to are those twin towers there. Those two towers are parts of, again, Robert Moses project, the Jacob Reese Park, sort of the bathing houses. And funny, why is it named after Jacob Reese? Well, there's a structure near Jacob Reese Park, you may have noticed if you've been out there, which is the old Neponset Hospital. This was a vision of Jacob Reese's, the great social reformer. And he had a vision for a tuberculosis hospital for children out at the Rockaways. Took a long time for it to come together, but that is the remains of that hospital that was built there. It also served servicemen and veterans, and sort of ended controversially. Giuliani closed it down for what apparently were rather trumped up charges of it being structurally unstable, and has remained vacant and in limbo ever since. But that is the hospital next to the park.
Yep. And I just switched sides, Stefan, so we could take a look at Floyd Bennett Fields here, so you can see the old radar dome and some of the hangar buildings. So Floyd Bennett Field, like I said, was the first municipal airport in New York City. And later it was taken over by the Navy. So it was a naval air station where they flew planes hunting Soviet submarines off the coast of New York and New Jersey. But yeah, there you can still see, obviously the runways are still there, and now it's a park. You can drive out on the runways, and lots of people fly model airplanes, and emergency services fly their helicopters out there, but it's no longer an airport. But what used to be there was something called Barren Island. And if you've been to that area, you go to the other side of it, you know that there's a spot called Dead Horse Bay, because this was all rendering plants out here. So they would bring dead animals, and animals made the city run, honestly.
Absolutely, power in the flesh.
And so it was basically the city's dumping ground. And so one of those dumps breached many years ago, and it all spills out onto Dead Horse Bay. So there you can see Cindy. People used to go out there and collect lots of beautiful glass. It's sort of the dump itself is pre-plastics. So most of what's in there is glass. Everything else is largely biodegradable. And so people would go out there to collect, antique glass and things. Last summer, they closed down Dead Horse Bay to public access. And the reason why is because they found radiation. There was radioactive materials that were in there, namely radium, which had been used by the Navy and on other ships to create illuminated deck markers. And those were used at the Brooklyn Navy Yard as well. So after they discovered that, they decided to not let people go there anymore. And actually, we have a clipping from the Brooklyn Navy Yard ship workers that there was those radioactive panels that were used. So these so-called atomic lamps. So they discovered those just last summer, and they said no more people going out to Dead Horse Bay. But we're looking at another island here in Jamaica Bay, right in front of me, Stefan.
Yeah, a place I've been.
One of the larger islands.
Yeah, this is Ruffle Bar. This was a place that was sort of variously inhabited from about 1840 till 1944. And had some oystering business on for a while. People tried to build casinos there. It's seen a lot of activity, but as is true of most of Jamaica Bay, for the last 60 or 80 years, it's been part of a wildlife refuge. It's a popular place for people in small boats to visit. It's got a lot of debris left over still from Sandy, pretty high into the bar there. And one of my favorite phenomena around New York is businesses named after natural places that are hard to see or no longer visible. It's true of, you see buried streams like Sunswick Creek over in Astoria has a bar named after it. And there's in Broad Channel, there's unsurprisingly, a Ruffle Bar. I've not been in yet, but I'm a fan just for its clever name.
Yeah, and so Broad Channel is a little bit further up to our right over here as we go farther into Jamaica Bay. But we're actually just pulling into the ferry stop right now. So I'm gonna disembark in just a minute, and we're gonna walk along towards the beach, and we'll talk and answer questions as we go. But one thing, Stefan, is you made a couple references before to tide mills.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of those and some of those tide mills that were in this area as we walk along to our last stop.
Absolutely. We'll give you a chance to get off the boat and through the crowds there.
Mm-hmm.
So as we've mentioned, this area and much of New York's waterfront was for a long time salt marshes, tide marshes. And these are places that would flood 5 or 6 feet twice a day as the tides came in and out. And let's go back a couple slides to get some context on this one. We mentioned Mill Basin as a place that's named after having a mill, a tide mill on it. All this, the tides coming in and going out, even though our tides are relatively moderate. For instance, tides in, say, London or in Anchorage can be 29 feet. Here in Flushing, they're more 8 or 9 feet typically. But in New York Harbor and Flushing Bay, or in Jamaica Bay, they tend to be closer to 4, 5, 6 feet at the most. And so though it may not be a lot of water, it's very predictable. And this makes it a really appealing source of power. So here we are with Floyd Bennett Field in the right side, Mill Basin at the top. And at the left, you see Plum Beach on the bottom and this big waterway. It's Garrettson Creek that opens there. And that densely populated half of a peninsula, and the bottom left is Garrettson Beach, the community of Garrettson Beach. It's a really fascinating place. It used to be a summer community that got developed and sort of made and winterized. And then we have all this green surrounding an island. That's Marine Park. There have been visions for turning it into a more formal park in the past. And the sort of Marine Park that's on land is in the upper left-hand corner, that big oval where a lot of the locals play cricket these days. But this waterway we see here, again, that's tidal. It used to be a lot more marshland. And about halfway down the island on the right side, there's a little point sticking out. And there is a place where you can still see the remnants of an 18th century tide mill. Really remarkable that we have this piece of 18th century technology. All they would do is sort of dam up the tide marshes and put gates on it. And the gates would open into the impoundment area as the tide rose, letting the water in. And as soon as the tide started going out, the gates would close with the flow of the tide. And then you allow the water through one gate that feeds directly to a mill. There you can see those pilings right where the cursor is. That's the remains of an 18th century tide mill. Still visible even from satellite view, and certainly if you paddle down there, you'll see them up close. It burned, I believe, in the 30s, but there was a building there for quite a while. And these tide mills were what really made New Netherlands and early New York run. This is where people ground their grain for flour. And there was even one, Macomb's Dam, we talked about on our Harlem River trip. Macomb's Dam was a tide mill as well. All right, Andrew, you're on shore.
Yeah, yeah.
I should mention we're going to talk more about tide mills on the 31st. Brad Vogel will be back to talk about that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, if people have any questions, I know we kind of had to motor through. The ferry goes pretty quickly, so I think there were a few things that we wanted to talk about, but didn't quite have time for. Yeah, I mean, one thing was, this area that we're in, I'm walking towards the Atlantic Ocean. So this is the Atlantic shoreline. We have 500 plus miles of shoreline in New York City, but very little of it is actually facing kind of the open ocean. And so we're in an area that's called the New York Bight, this sort of sharp right turn in the coastline from New Jersey over to Long Island. And the New York Aquarium, Wildlife Conservation Society, put together this really awesome guide to it, which we'll share later on. But if maybe we want to pull up a picture, there's that really beautiful map that they put together. And we can talk a little bit more, since you were mentioning before the Hudson Canyon. So we can take a look at that geological formation.
See if we have that up here in a moment. And of course, the Hudson Canyon was formed in no small part because of the flow from the Hudson. We've talked in other programs about how the Hudson is basically, the Hudson River, as we think of it, is really a fjord. that
Right.
the Wisconsin Glacier cut through the Serpentine and the all that hard rock coming down from Albany. The original Hudson River before it came through the Narrows, originally the Hudson River exited the land through Raritan Bay, south of Staten Island. There was we talked about the terminal moraine that creates Long Island. The glacier pushed all this rock in front of it that piled up to form Long Island, and also much of the highlands of Staten Island. And those were initially connected. The Narrows didn't open until about 6,000 years ago, when the water behind it finally broke through and wore down a channel and rerouted the Hudson shorter path. And then that led to cutting this beautiful streak you see leading from the Hudson down the Narrows into the continental shelf on the map.
Yeah, and so there's another portion of this as well. And again, we'll share a link. You can download this online. But the other portion shows the incredible biodiversity of this area. And so this is, you know, we talked about this before, how so many species have returned to New York Harbor, and species we haven't seen in generations. And so now we have whale watching that you can do in this area, and seal watching, and other sorts of really rich marine wildlife.
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't throw a photo in it. We should have thought about that given our plans to talk about biodiversity. But was it just this last winter or 2 winters ago when we had that great photo of the whale in New York Harbor in front of the Statue of Liberty?
Yeah. It was a humpback whale.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really astounding, you know, how much cleaner the harbor is than it was even just 20, 30 years ago. So yeah.
And hopefully we'll keep working on that. I see we do have someone who's raised their hand. If you just want to
I did want to
in the chat, what does you have to say? Go ahead.
I want to say hello to this cat. In the window.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
Living the life, the
Yep.
cat hammock. So you're getting quite close to the beach. It looks like you just passed under the subway.
Yeah. So I'm just walking past here. I'm coming up to the Rockaway Hotel, which was just opened a couple of years ago. Pretty swanky place.
And of course, Rockaway has really developed a reputation as a place for surfing, especially where you're going. There's a lot of surfers out there a lot of the time.
Yeah, I will say that over the last month, Cindy and I have a new ritual, which is every weekend we come out here, but you know, it can get really, really busy. And so on the ferry, so we take the very first ferry of the day at like 8:03 a.m. from the Army terminal, come down here, swim for an hour or so, get on the 10:50 ferry back, and we're home before noon. So it's a great way to get to the beach and avoid all of the pretty crazy weekend crowds.
And I'm sure that now that you've recommended that, you've got 20 more people who will be joining you.
Yeah. You got to get up pretty early in the morning, but we're going to come up to the boardwalk in just a second. And obviously, you know, you can't talk about most of the communities that we've gone past today without talking about the impact of climate change, sea level rise, and of course, Hurricane Sandy, which is now we're approaching the 9th anniversary of it. And so we're going to come up on the boardwalk, which is one of the largest and most important pieces of post-Sandy infrastructure that was built by the city to try and protect our shoreline. Because again, it's all built on sand. You know, it's it's not really, geologically speaking, built to last. And so all of this that we're walking on in a century ago, a lot of this was water. But I'll be up on the boardwalk in just a minute.
And it looks like Joanne likes the idea of joining you for your early morning weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so I'll flip my camera around here.
And even if you don't go to the beach, I mean, there's nothing like the surf on the beach. But just this last weekend, I went down and explored some of the farther, quieter corners of the bay side as well. The bay is fascinating, much quieter water, and maybe not the place you want to swim necessarily, but there are fishermen pulling out pogies, and for the plane spotters, places like Bayswater Point State Park, which are right under the flight path. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get interrupted. I'm surprised, in fact, that we haven't had a lot.
There's a plane actually approaching JFK right now. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the bay, and that's also one of the really big challenges for these communities in Jamaica Bay and Coney Island as well, which is that we think about the big storm surges coming from the ocean, but from the ocean side, but on these narrow peninsulas, you also get storm surges that come from the often less protected bay side as well. And it's in communities like Rockaway and Coney Island where the waters met during Hurricane Sandy. And that's a really, really bad situation to be in. But yeah, so here we're on the Coney Island Boardwalk. So this was, some of you may remember, this was totally destroyed in 2012. So this boardwalk was totally destroyed. It was previously a wooden boardwalk. And so it was nearly 5 years that the city spent rebuilding this, not just as a boardwalk, but this is essentially a concrete barricade that protects the communities on the other side of it. So this is meant to be, essentially like a seawall here with the beach just on the other side. And I'm gonna walk a little bit closer to the beach, but you may, I know the reception is not great the closer I get to the beach, but we'll maybe be able to see a little bit of the dunes and the waves crashing.
I want you to put your phone down and go swimming.
Yeah, I will in a few minutes probably, but yeah, so this is the best way to get to the beach. You can take the A train, which is also a perfectly fine way to get here, but the views aren't quite as good as taking the ferry.
I feel more relaxed already just watching.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions about anything we talked about, Stefan, I know there were things that we definitely kind of skimmed over or missed. I mean, we went through the Narrows so quickly. I know there was so much stuff that we wanted to talk about in that spot on the harbor. Didn't quite have time.
We did want to talk about some of the disasters that have happened.
Right.
On shipping, but yeah, those are some sad stories. I want to note that the handle Sketch What You See, who I suspect I know who that is, says looks like they planted grasses to protect the dunes. What do you know about the efforts to restore to protect the community in more natural ways?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, there were many tons of sand that were dumped here, and then there was intentional planting of dune grasses, and there's only so much that we can accomplish by using sort of hard man-made infrastructure. There have been proposals to build a sea wall, a gate essentially across Jamaica Bay, basically between the Rockaway Peninsula and Coney Island, to protect that sort of backfill and flooding these communities from the bay side. But there's also been a proposal to build a seawall that would go from the Rockaway Peninsula over to Sandy Hook, basically close off the entire lower New York Bay, which seems crazy. And again, the water has to go somewhere. And this is the case whenever we're talking about stormwater management, whether it's for flooding or whether it's for, sewage. The water has to go somewhere, and the best way to manage it is to use natural processes that absorb that water in some way. So we want to control, rainwater runoff, have more absorbent surfaces for it to run on. Same thing, if you want to control coastal flooding, you want, something along the coastline that's going to absorb that energy and absorb that water. So,
And
the
like
world,
you were saying about
yeah,
Jamaica Bay, all of Long Island is subject to the same issue of having
yeah,
water come around the backside. That if you're just protecting the New York Bight and the Sandy Hook over to Breezy Point, then you have to deal with what's that do to the Hellgate and to the communities on this side of Long Island. This is a very
yeah,
complicated situation.
yeah, that's right. And, the ocean is not just sort of a big flat sort of surface. It has its own flows, and especially when we're going in between narrow channels and things, it can, the hydrology can get extremely complicated. I was thinking about the other side of Long Island yesterday. I was actually up in Connecticut, and the Long Island Sound, is not really part of the ocean because it's constricted on both ends. One of those ends being the Hellgate, and the other end being Orient Point and Fisher's Island. And that creates really, really complicated currents in both of those places as that water, the tides suck it in and push it out of that body of water. So yeah, it's really complicated.
We have a little research from one of our viewers here. It said, love the story about Jacob Reese and the TB hospital for children. Just read it was closed in 43 by Mayor LaGuardia to conserve 300,000 gallons of oil that was saved by the city during the war, and was reopened in 1945. So yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, that's...
Yeah, and maybe we can put Stefan's spotlight on too. So we've seen a lot of the beach here. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a lot of stories about that particular hospital and the ins and outs of the whole latter half of the 20th century and the city trying to deal with its infrastructure. When it came back after it's finished serving service members, it became the first municipally run center for elderly people, sort of kind of a nursing home situation, and one of many that would follow.
Mm-hmm.
And remained that until the Giuliani administration. There was one question about what are your cross streets? How can we?
Yeah, so I'm at Beach 108th Street. So that's the entrance that's closest to the ferry right here. So it's not too far. A little bit further up here is where the main sort of concession stand is on Rockaway Beach, where there's a bunch of different vendors over there. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. So behind me is Jacob Reese Park, but I'm basically sort of close to the end of the subway line here. So the subway doesn't quite go to Jacob Reese, but you can take the bus down there.
And as I understand, I've read recently they're planning on extending the boardwalk. The boardwalk kind of ends not too far from where you are.
Yeah.
Which is not the favorite decision of people in Bell Harbor and some of those other communities down there, Neponset Beach itself. But it sounds like that will help protect them for the next storm.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we don't need to get into all of the politics about that down here, but yeah, it's the nice thing about it is that it is. It's a great public space that also serves a function for protecting the shoreline. It's not sort of as obtrusive and allows access to the beach as well. So yeah, I'd like to see more boardwalk here in Rockaway for sure.
I'm more of a winter and fall and spring beachgoer myself, so maybe that prejudices me. But I feel like I've found the boardwalk typically pretty quiet. A lot of people biking or walking along, but it's a very different boardwalk from Coney Island.
Yes, yeah, for sure. It doesn't have the attractions and the concessions that Coney Island does. It's totally different, and the beach is totally different too. Coney Island is much quieter in terms of the waves because you're on you're sort of tucked in behind the Rockaway Peninsula, behind Breezy Point. Whereas here we get much larger waves because we are, we're basically facing the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's delightful and remarkable, that change. And then compare that to be, to the tiny waves you sometimes get on the shores of the upper bay in the harbor.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't quite look at, but some people will notice, if you take the ferry to Rockaways, we've talked about a couple of lighthouses, and you would ask me the other day about a lighthouse-looking structure out at Breezy Point.
Oh yeah, we didn't quite get to see that, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. But allies communities really take great pride in in some of their maritime infrastructure and their lighthouses. That particular structure is not a lighthouse, nor was it ever. My understanding is it was built as sort of to look like a lighthouse, but it was disguised as a watchtower for military purposes. It was.
Oh, interesting. So in the follow-up email, I took a photo of it the other day. If folks don't know what I'm talking about, we'll post a photo of it. Yeah. Oh, thank you for looking into that. Again, we just covered, I don't know how many miles, a lot of shoreline. So there's only so much we could cover in this hour-long conversation. But yeah, I want to thank everybody so much for joining us. If you have any other questions, feel free to follow up with us. We'll send you an email. If you missed any portion of this program, we'll send you a link to the recording. And we want to keep doing these ferry programs. They're some of our most popular, and they're just really fun to have these conversations on the boat. And they're much nicer. Some of you may have joined the one we did in February when it was about 5 degrees. So this is a much more pleasant ride.
I enjoyed watching that one from the comfort of home, but and they're opening new ferries. I'm looking forward to the ferry to Coney Island.
Yeah.
Give us a great look at some places, a deeper dive into Gravesend Bay, and lots to look forward to.
Great, awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody. And we will see you. We're taking a couple weeks off. We're gonna go on a little vacation, but we will see you on the 19th to talk about concrete shipbuilding, and we'll talk about your neck of the woods on that program up in Flushing Bay, Stefan.
Excellent.
We'll see you in a couple weeks, but join us for our in-person tours, which we're still doing every weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.